Hey, good morning and good afternoon. I begin our webinar today by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the place that I join you from today, and where people have been meeting and talking for thousands of years. So I pay my respects to those elders who are past, present, and emerging for their custodianship of country, and extend my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people joining us today. I also welcome the many custodians of lands and seas for all our friends joining from across the Pacific. My name is Kate Pickard, and together with my colleagues from Ocean Decade Australia, Jazz Chambers and Dr. Lucy Buxton, we thank our presenters and contributors for their time and energy today in bringing their expertise and insights to our last Ocean Knowledge Series event for 2024. Today's session will be recorded. We welcome your questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and while we may not manage to get to all questions, we will do our best to come back with responses in our follow-up communications. So before we dive into that part of our session, I invite Lucy to facilitate a short debrief with some key industry contributors to talk about recent ocean events.
Thanks, Kate. The past few months have been incredibly dynamic for ocean-focused events, and we're fortunate today to have with us three distinguished industry experts who will provide their unique perspectives and key takeaways from these activities. Their insights will help us better understand the challenges and opportunities ahead, and perhaps most importantly, the ways that we can work together to drive meaningful change. Let me introduce our first speaker, Oliver Doraisamy, Senior Manager for Policy Engagement at the Australian Sustainable Finance Institute. Most recently, Oliver presented at the 2024 Sustainable Finance Summit hosted by APSI. This summit was a cornerstone event exploring how finance can drive transformative outcomes for climate resilience and sustainable ocean economies. Welcome, Oliver.
Thanks very much, Lucy, and thanks to the Ocean Decade team. Just very briefly, for those who aren't familiar with ASFI and our work, we're a member-based non-profit focused on realigning Australia's financial system to be more sustainable, inclusive and resilient. And so we work with a range of stakeholders, not just our financial institution members, but also government, regulators, civil societies, academics, and other businesses to increase flows of finance towards sustainability outcomes. And it's really looking at that whole of financial system perspective. As Lucy mentioned, we held our annual Australian Sustainable Finance Summit at the end of October. The reason for holding these summits is really an opportunity to bring that range of stakeholders together to share insights on existing challenges and opportunities, bring in knowledge from different perspectives, and that includes global perspectives. So we had 400 attendees at our summit. A good chunk of those were from financial institutions, but 60% of the attendees were from a range of those stakeholder groups that I mentioned. So government and regulators, non-profits and civil society, which includes academia, and then other business groups. The focus for our summit this year was on catalysing ambition into action, and I guess that reflects a little bit the shift over the last few years in the sustainability landscape in Australia. So we're moving, hopefully, a little away from the why and a bit more of a granular focus on the what and the how. Of course, that case for why in relation to sustainability is still really important, but we're at a stage now where we're getting a bit more specific and action oriented and hopefully more outcomes oriented as well. Some of the I guess key themes that were covered in the session in the summit, were the importance of policy and regulatory settings in Australia to drive sustainability, and that's not just specific to the finance sector, but across the economy. The need for innovation across the financial system and in businesses more broadly to address key social and environmental challenges, and also the real importance of collaboration across sectors and within sectors. And so breaking down some of those traditional barriers to competition in order to address these really tricky challenges. A few highlights from my perspective that I wanted to share. We tried this year to really elevate the number of First Nations voices and perspectives that we were bringing into the discussion, recognizing that I guess the sustainability agenda in Australia presents a real opportunity to increase equitable partnerships with our First Nations communities. And that's particularly the case in the climate transition, but it's also relevant in a broader, I guess, nature positive shift, drawing on Indigenous knowledge and wisdom, but also recognising the important role that the Indigenous land estate has in a lot of our national sustainability objectives. So we heard from community and business leaders in New Zealand and from various First Nations communities in Australia. The last two reflections that I'll share that stood out for me were one, an increasing recognition of the importance of intersectionality across issues. And so if you're a business or a financial institution, it's not just looking at climate in a siloed manner, but thinking about things such as the climate nature nexus and thinking about interplays across natural systems, including oceans, but also the interplay with social and community considerations, and First Nations is one of those. And then the final reflection that may be of interest to this group, we had a fireside conversation with Minister Plibersek, I think it was the week after or 2 weeks after the Global Nature Positive Summit. I think many of us on this call will know there have been difficulties progressing environmental reform in Australia this year. And so for me, that conversation underscored, again, the importance of cross-sector collaboration, community awareness, advocacy in relation to the importance of environmental protection for a range of reasons, some of which very much go to economic resilience. So I'll leave it there and let others share their updates from their events. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks so much, Oliver, for those insightful remarks. Our next speaker is Jonathan Favez, Chief Executive Officer of Carnegie Clean Energy. Jonathan leads one of Australia's pioneering organisations in wave energy technology, and his leadership and vision have positioned Carnegie at the forefront of renewable energy innovation. Jonathan recently attended the 2024 International Conference on Ocean Energy, which focused on Australia's rapidly advancing ocean energy initiatives. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, Lucy. Yes, it was a great event. And for those that don't know too much about ocean energy, it's essentially the wave and tidal energy players. So yeah, it was especially good this year. It's held every 2 years, but it was the first time in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's usually in the US or Europe where, most of the ocean energy players are. And I think the European Commission Senior Policy Officer, Matthias Soda, sort of captured it really well in that he noted, the advantage of it being in a different place to where it usually is, and that sort of sparked new faces and new conversations and different perspectives that hadn't been held before, and certainly something he'd noticed. So that was great. Also, what was notable was the US presence. So there were quite a number of US delegates there, which was unusual and fantastic. I think it's largely because they just launched a $112 million US dollar wave deployment fund support. So this is the first dedicated wave energy support that's been available in the US. Certainly, it's been common in Europe, but yeah, it's first time we've seen that in the US. So that's really got the industry buzzing. We're hoping Australia might follow suit, and that's really what needs to happen if Australia is going to kind of match it in the world in terms of wave energy and build on the sort of capability that we've got so far, and really that huge, I guess, resource of wave energy that we've got. We stand head and shoulders above the rest of the world in terms of that resource. So let's hope we can make the most of it. Also, discussed was just the opportunity that the consistency of wave energy and predictability of that energy source brings to a grid like Australia's, where we've got considerable solar and wind, which is very variable. I mean, we saw the wind droughts this year on the national electricity market over winter. So, yeah, Australia's got an opportunity to avoid huge amounts of battery build and overbuilding of solar and wind if we embrace wave energy. So that was certainly discussed, and I think one of the reasons why, I guess, arguably the leader of the wave energy industry, Corpower from Sweden, was in attendance and really started to, I guess, formulate some project interest here in Australia. I think also the definition of the offshore energy zones helped significantly in this regard. And yeah, it was great to have the government agencies responsible for that, DQ and NOPSEMA, really talking about the details around those zones, and some war stories about how the social license aspects of offshore wind had been elevated during that whole development. So yeah, that was really interesting and great to have them there. There were also some significant tidal energy developers at the conference. Despite Australia not being a huge, I guess, or not having a huge resource for tidal, it was really great to see them. And tidal energy is really racing ahead in Europe in particular, where there's not only grant support now, but significant revenue support as well. So that was interesting to see. And yeah, that's really the crux of it. I think kudos to Christophe Godin from UWA and Irene Panessis, who were the driving force behind it, and the hosts was the Blue Economy CRC, which is a huge driving force behind the blue economy industry and wave energy in Australia. It certainly has moved the needle a bit with the recent wave energy report that's just come out following the offshore wind report from last year. So yeah, all in all, very positive event, and great to have international players here in Australia.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for sharing those remarks. And our next and final speaker is Erin Coldman, Chief Development Officer at Southerly 10, a leading force in the development of Australia's offshore wind industry. Erin recently participated in the Australian Wind Energy Conference, which is a key forum that brings together industry leaders, policymakers, and innovators to discuss the latest advancements. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you, Lucy, and ODA for pulling this discussion together. I did attend Australian Wind Energy 2024, and like the other speakers, it was a very well-attended global event. So we had around 800 conference delegates. There were thousands of visitors to the free exhibition and around 160 speakers. So it was quite a big program. And really, why are we having these big forums about wind in Melbourne? Some of the reflections were around the task at hand. Many people would be familiar with Australia's ambition to be 82% renewable by 2030, reducing emissions from 2005 levels to 43% by 2030. So really what that's going to require is a lot of wind. So the type of people we had at that event are the players that are trying to push that forward. We had keynote addresses from Minister D'Ambrosio in Victoria, the Energy Minister, as well as the offshore infrastructure regulator with regards to the offshore wind sector. We also know that Australia's got the fourth highest technical potential for offshore wind in the world. So when I did look at the big caliber of delegates coming, I think it's really interesting to see the world really hone in on Australia and what its role can be in helping to solve that global opportunity. Because while we have our own local ambitions, it really is about globally how we're solving for some of those climate challenges, which naturally do have that alarming effect on the ocean. And to put that into perspective, we have 86 gigawatts of offshore wind being auctioned globally over the next 3 years. And a lot of the focus is now shifting to how is Australia doing that. Over the past few years, we've had some great success setting up the regulatory frameworks. We have legislated targets in Victoria for offshore wind energy. There's still some more puzzle pieces to go. So certainly one of my reflections was on some of those puzzle pieces and how we compete for that global capital in a very competitive industry. We also focused on regional opportunities. So I was really pleased with this conference that the organisers had a specific regional focus with representation from the Gippsland, Hunter, Central Queensland and Pilbara, because even though these events are taking place in the city, we need to make sure that those regional voices are heard and that we are exploring those opportunities as well as some of the challenges of rolling out renewable energy projects in those areas. Finally, I was really delighted to be able to speak at the event. One of the things I spoke about was in this energy transition, working smarter and not harder. And there are various ways that we can do that. Naturally, the use of offshore wind and harnessing that technical potential that we've got is a way of doing that. But equally, how we're consulting with local communities, other ocean users, how we're doing that from the outset so that we're working smarter in this energy transition and not having problems down the track because we haven't invested in that work. So that was certainly some of the focus, and I invite anyone on the call here to contact me if they'd like more information.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin, and to all of our speakers so far. So in addition to the events we've just heard about, there have been several other significant gatherings shaping the ocean community's agenda. These include the Seafood Directions Conference, Australian Marine Science Association Conference, Sea Country Conference, and the Global Nature Positive Summit and the Ocean Dialogue. Each of these events has contributed valuable insights and momentum to the conversation around ocean use. And for those interested in learning more, we encourage you to check out the ODA newsletter and the dedicated conference pages where you'll find detailed summaries and resources. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Jazz Chambers, who will be facilitating today's panel discussion. Jazz, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lucy, and thanks to Kate and the speakers that we've had so far. Thank you. For those of you who are new to Ocean Decade Australia, we're a national not-for-profit NGO focused on connecting Australia's ocean stakeholders through knowledge, networking and learning. So together we can drive the conditions for a successful and sustainable ocean economy. I'm delighted to announce that we will shortly launch membership of Ocean Decade Australia, inviting people from organisations with the vision and dedication to shape the future of a thriving blue economy and a healthy ocean to join us. 2025 is, of course, the midway point for the UN Ocean Decade, and after 4 years of operation and many hundreds and hundreds of meetings, probably with lots of people on this call from across Australia and globally, we will soon be sending you further information on how to join our leadership community. Through 2025, we will host a great range of events, networking, and also real roll-up-your-sleeves opportunities to get involved. And we know that it's only together that we can chart a course that is sensible, respectful, ambitious, and that has as our North Star a focus on being good ancestors for people well beyond us. So watch this space. But today we are gathered to hear from two people who it's been our great pleasure to know and work with for many years, Susie Heaton and Belinda Jago, a formidable and dedicated team who together oversee many aspects of Australia's environmental strategy, policy and programming. Susie leads international environment with responsibility for strategy and engagement, including relating to the ocean, migratory species and the Indo-Pacific, amongst many other things as well. Susie has worked for the Federal Environment Department for 15 years with a particular focus on international policy and engagement. She was Environment Councillor in Australia's permanent delegation to the UNESCO in Paris in 2022 and is Australia's Commissioner to the International Whaling Commission. Belinda Jago heads the Ocean and Wildlife Branch with responsibility for delivery of Australia's Sustainable Ocean Plan and domestic ocean policy matters, including responsibility for wildlife trade, and facilitating the list of and conservation planning for marine threatened species under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Belinda's experience in ocean strategic policy and management spans more than 2 decades, including implementing marine regulatory reforms, marine spatial planning, rezoning, and management of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. And she is currently part of a research project on integrated ocean management in Canada and Australia. So today, though, we're going to hone in and focus on the expertise of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy and Australia's commitment made under that panel for all members. Oh. I'm back. Sorry, we've got sorry, everyone, we've got okay, today we are focused on their expertise of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy and Australia's commitment made under that panel to develop a sustainable ocean plan. Susie and Belinda will provide us with short presentations and some questions. We will also welcome Dr. Russell Reichelt, Australia's Sherpa to the Ocean Panel, into the conversation. So Susie, I invite you to kick us off. Thank you.
Thanks, Jazz. Just want to check that you can hear me okay. Jazz, can you hear me?
Over to Susie.
Jazz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Excellent. Okay. Hi, everyone. Jazz, thank you so much for that introduction. And thanks for reaching out to Belinda and me. It's great to have this opportunity to talk about the ocean agenda. I will always talk about the ocean agenda, particularly the ocean panel. But can I just start by also acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which I'm meeting today. I'm here in Canberra, so I'm on the lands of the Ngunnawal people. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge their continuing connection to land and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining this conversation today. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Russell Reichelt, our Sherpa to the Ocean Panel, and I think our Ocean Panel team's online too, so shout out to Heath, Sabina and Tess. And I can also see a number of other people on the line that have been engaged in the panel over the years, so hi everyone. And what I'd like to do is tell you the story of how we came to be a member of the Ocean Panel and our journey to date. And it really all started back in 2018 at the World Economic Forum when the then Norwegian Prime Minister approached our then Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, asking if Australia would be part of this panel that Norway was establishing. And obviously the answer was yes, this is something we should be part of. And from the beginning, and this came from the Prime Minister's office at the time, Australia's position has been that a healthy ocean is the foundation of a sustainable ocean economy. And that's really the reason why the panel came to our department. So we're very excited about that. It started off with 14 leaders and heads of state, and that's now grown to 19. You can see the map there with the spread of Ocean Panel member countries. It's co-chaired by Norway and Palau. Leaders meet once a year in the margins of the UN General Assembly in New York. But the work really happens throughout the year, led by the Sherpas, who represent their leaders. And in our case, that's Russell, very ably supported by our team. And these leaders have voluntarily come together to work out how the world can rapidly transition to a sustainable ocean economy. And back in 2018, that was a very new policy space. So the Ocean Panel is non-UN, so it sits outside the UN system. It's dynamic, it moves quickly, it's ambitious. And I think for those reasons, it's one of the most exciting things I've ever worked on. I think Russell would agree. When I think of the panel, I think of it in 3 stages. So stage 1 was from 2018 to 2020, and that was about setting the global ambition. We spent about a year to 18 months negotiating what became the transformations document. So if we could just move to slide 2. We were very engaged in the development of the transformations document. We worked very closely with the other panel members and in particular Norway. The transformations have 5 areas or pillars, each of which has a set of outcomes and priority actions. You can see the conceptual framework there on the right-hand side, which essentially is saying that a sustainable ocean economy consists of ocean wealth, ocean health, equity, knowledge, and finance. And you can't have a sustainable ocean economy if one of those is missing. The headline commitment for the panel is what we call the 100% commitment or 100% approach. And that is to sustainably manage 100% of the ocean area under national jurisdiction guided by sustainable ocean plans by 2025. And Belinda will talk about how we're meeting that commitment. we were careful to insert language in the transformations to make clear that countries will implement them in accordance with their national circumstances. And that's important because there's no cookie cutter approach to sustainable ocean planning or management. You'd rightly expect that the priorities and approaches in Fiji would be different from that of the US, for example. When the transformations document was released, a set of action groups were established to respond to the priorities in the transformations. And those groups are made up of the private sector, NGOs, philanthropic organisations and multilateral development banks. So, for example, there are groups on offshore renewable energy, on tourism, and on ocean accounting. There's also an Ocean Action 2030 group, which is a global coalition made up of institutions that are providing technical and financial assistance to countries to help them develop and implement the sustainable ocean plans. So that's stage one, setting the global ambition. Stage two is from 2021 to 2025, and that's about delivering on that 100% commitment, and Belinda will talk about that. Stage three runs from 2025 to 2030, and that's about panel members sharing their experience of developing their sustainable ocean plans and helping other countries do that in line with their national interests. And Sherpas and their teams are now turning their collective minds on how we can best do that. A couple of quick reflections on the panel. As I mentioned before, our starting point was that a healthy ocean is the foundation of a sustainable ocean economy, and that still is true. But we've evolved our thinking over time to realise that, of course, people are at the centre, and equity is now a very dominant theme in the panel's work. Our engagement in the panel really provided that unifying narrative for the ocean that we'd been missing. So back in 2018, before we joined, if we were asked by our minister or the public about what's Australia doing on the ocean, we'd probably say something like, well, we have a network of marine parks and we're trying to address plastic pollution in the ocean and we're strongly opposed to commercial whaling. But our approach was quite siloed and we didn't have a joined up narrative or approach. And so that sustainable ocean economy really became the narrative and the vision that we were all able to coalesce around. So when we started negotiating the transformations document, we established a network of about 20 Australian government agencies across the government with responsibility for various aspects of the ocean to help negotiate that document. And that didn't exist before. And Belinda will be able to talk to you about how that network has grown even further to help do our sustainable ocean plan. I think that the panel is still an important and influential body. And part of our role as ocean panel members is to advocate for the ocean and that 100% commitment and approach in our international engagement. We see the ocean's prominence more and more in global and regional fora. For example, we're seeing a much stronger focus on sustainable ocean management in UNESCO. And it's fantastic to see the 100% commitments being picked up in the Pacific's Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity Initiative, for example. And when I visualize the very crowded international ocean space, and there is a proliferation of ocean initiatives and bodies, I kind of see the panel sitting over the top of it, even though it doesn't have a formal status, it's not a UN body, but it sits over the top, offering ambition and know-how and support. I'll finish by saying that the ocean is a priority for the government. It's what connects us with our region. We need to work with other countries to address transboundary threats to the ocean. What impacts our neighbours impacts us. Some of our really key priorities over the next months and years are, of course, delivering our sustainable ocean plan and then thinking about how we support our region to also do sustainable ocean planning and sustainable ocean management, both within exclusive economic zones and on the high seas. So BBNJ ratification and implementation is a top priority for us. The key meeting for us, or one of the key meetings for us next year, is the UN Ocean Conference in June. And we're really glad that Australia is sort of co-chairing the political declaration for UNOC with Cabo Verde. We are very interested in the ocean climate nexus as well, that was mentioned earlier. And our point there is that the ocean shouldn't just be seen as a victim of climate change, it's the source of many of the solutions as well. And finally, of migratory species, it continues to be a priority for us, including whales. And we're really happy to be chairing the International Whaling Commission now and hosting the next meeting in 2026. And I'll leave it there, Jazz, and very happy to answer any questions a bit later on.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Susie, for that great wrap up there. I'll now hand over to Belinda to provide us a bit of background on what the area that she leads. Thanks, Belinda.
Thanks, Jazz, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about the Sustainable Ocean Plan with you all today. I can see many familiar names in the chat and online, so I apologise in advance that I am going to probably cover a few things that you are already aware of, but I'll try and do it fast so we can get to the next steps. I would like to also let everyone know I'm joining from Townsville today, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Wulgurukaba and Bindul people as I sit on their country, and extend that acknowledgement right across the country to where you are today, and also acknowledge the First Nations and traditional owners of sea country right around the country, given that we're talking about the ocean today. So I would like to probably start off with a little recap, if that's okay. I just want to stress that as Susie gave that great intro of understanding where the commitment came from and the important work of the Ocean Panel, the Prime Minister sits as the member on the Ocean Panel, and so the commitment for a Sustainable Ocean Plan comes from his role on the Ocean Panel. It's so the Prime Minister a few years ago provided the task of developing Australia's Sustainable Ocean Plan to the Minister for the Environment, but it really is about the sustainable ocean economy as a whole. And of course, as Susie pointed out very rightly, in order to have a healthy and growing sustainable ocean economy, you also need a healthy ocean environment. So given the broad portfolio arrangements that the Minister for the Environment has, that's where it's sat, but we do work across 24 different Australian government agencies and departments to help inform the development of the Sustainable Ocean Plan, and that's just the Australian government, let alone all of the states and territories and their expertise and many, many others. So the purpose of the plan, this is really recap. So what is the purpose? It really is to look at where are we today? So what is the ocean we have now? Where do we want to be? What is that 2040 vision? Where does that take us? And what are the things that make the difference between here and there? So what kind of actions need to be implemented by who in order to be able to make and see that change? Probably next slide, Jazz. So over the last 18 months, we really have undertaken a substantial amount of work to really listen across the country to lots of different stakeholders, jurisdictions, First Nations people, ocean industries, of which there are many, science and research and community groups about what they want to see for their future in the ocean. So on the slide, you can see the draft national vision that was included in the draft Sustainable Ocean Plan, and the 8 priorities that came from all of that deep engagement that we had from cross jurisdictions and multi-sectors. So just a little bit more on the draft before I get to next steps. So the plan, the draft plan was high level in nature. It really was designed to provide that sort of collective understanding of where are we heading, that, you know, sort of lighthouse on the hill, so to speak. Can we all move in that direction together as a nation? And then what are those key steps we need to take in order to achieve those outcomes? The outcomes for each of those priorities were detailed in the draft. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't sort of had a look at all, that please do, you know, delve into that draft and have a look regarding sort of each of those key priorities, because they really did come from a lot of detailed engagement from a lot of you online and also many, many different sectors and government officials, science agencies, NGOs. I might talk a little bit about the how we plan to really use the plan. So as a nation, because it is high level, Australia has, you know, a myriad of ocean management arrangements to date. We have taken probably more of a sector and jurisdictional sort of approach to much of our ocean management. And this plan gives us an opportunity to really think about it as an inclusive, forward-looking plan about where do we want to pull together and where do we want to head. Next slide, thanks, Jazz. So in the sort of where we are, we have released the draft for public comment that closed in September. So it was open in August, September. And we got about 170 submissions, just over 170 submissions. Most of the submissions really focused on supporting the plan, its vision and priorities and outcomes, which was great to hear. So that reflected a lot of the engagement we had, but it was good to be able to still see that support through the submissions. And there were a number of submissions, many calling for greater ambition of the plan as a national sort of strategic plan, and really looking for detailed targets, responsibilities, timeframes for implementation. There was definitely a strong desire from stakeholders to be part of the next step and part of its implementation. So looking for sort of the way in which they could be involved in that. And we definitely heard from a range of different industries and ocean industry groups as well, or interest groups, should I say, that they felt that we could highlight and show a greater focus really on the important role they all play in the ocean. So really, how do we amplify those things? One of the areas that I'd probably highlight is one of the areas that got quite a number of comments back was really on ocean governance or coordination, collaboration, that space of how do we talk together? How do we work together for the future? How can we improve even further from where we are today? So it's not just sort of setting aside those good things that might already be happening in many, many areas, but how do we take that even to the next step and amplify it further? So there are a wide range of ideas from stakeholders about what could be put in place. There was also a range of ideas from maybe there needs to be a minister for the ocean, maybe there needs to be an agency nationally that does that, that coordinates and aligns across ocean portfolios, interest groups, jurisdictions. Maybe that needs to be at the federal level, at the state and territory level, across those levels. So there were lots of really detailed ideas about ocean governance, but I suppose a key thread that came through was definitely that this was a key piece that people saw that we could use the plan for and to help bring our national conversation on the ocean to not just a national level, but then be able to use that to really consider, are we taking up those opportunities for our ocean economy? Are we thinking about the environment? How do we, bring this all together in a cohesive way for the future? I want to touch on the Ocean Dialogue and the Global Nature Positive Summit as well. And again, thank you for many of you that were attending on the 10th of October in Sydney following the Global Nature Positive Summit. The Ocean Dialogue brought together about 180 odd participants, which was just fantastic. Obviously, we had domestic and regional attendees as well, which was important to be able to really understand that the plan has a role nationally, and we tend to look inside our EEZ and so forth for that. But as Susie pointed out, we have a place here in our region. The ocean isn't a hard boundary where things don't swim across or come, stop at a particular border. So we do need to work with our neighbours and region as well as globally, and we have important roles to play in that space and things that we can offer into that arena as well. It was great to hear at the Ocean Dialogue a bit of the cross conversation, so hearing from each other and providing that opportunity to be able to understand each other's challenges and ideas about a sustainable ocean future. And it was very clear from both the Ocean Dialogue Day and also the public submissions on the plan that the ocean plan is really gaining momentum, and stakeholders are clearly looking for leadership from government to moving from the discussion phase to action. So the two sort of public consultation opportunities that were presented over this year really were instrumental in really refining for us where to target in our refinements for the final plan. So we have worked pretty hard across the board. I know I've got only a minute left, Jazz. So we've worked really hard across the board with that commentary we've received, and with our Australian government and state and territory colleagues to finalise the plan. We've been able to strengthen a number of key areas that stakeholder consultation really highlighted. The plan will remain a high-level plan, noting its role in the sort of providing that guiding strategic advice, but definitely hear from everyone that it really is about how we then take those steps forward into having sort of the operating environment that is inclusive and allows everyone to be part of that table of stepping out their implementation actions, timing, targets into the next year. So where are we right now? We're currently in Australian government consideration of the plan, and then be able to commence Australian government and state and territory government endorsement. So we're in final steps. So we have progressed quite substantially from the Ocean Dialogue and public consultation period, but noting that we really are in a shared responsibility space across jurisdictions, that we do want to make sure that we give the space for all governments now to consider the plan and be able to take this really important step and make it a step forward together. I might leave it there, and but really happy to take comments and questions at the end. Thanks, Jess.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for all that knowledge given to us today. Before we get into the chat, I do encourage people to put questions into the Q&A part of Zoom, and we will attempt to get to some of these, but we will come back and cover them off when we send out the recording. I wanted to go to you, Susie, first. Just on, sorry, Susie, I think when you unmute, that something happens to our microphone. So yes, I'll go on mute when you come off. Just with respect to, I mean, you've got an enormous amount of experience across international ocean policy, and we do seem to be seeing a real rising of voices and a lot of initiatives that are occurring globally right now. Why are we seeing that happen? We've got the UN Ocean Decade. I mean, are these things sort of, happening because there's, one event happens and then we put together another initiative and they're kind of rolling on, or is there something else going on in the system that's creating this demand?
Unmuting. Can you hear me, Jazz? Great. Okay. Thanks for the question. And you're right there. As I said before, there's even back in 2018, there was a proliferation of ocean agreements, bodies, initiatives, and it's even more the case now. I mean, just take one subset, marine plastics. It's almost an uncountable number of things happening. And I think it's because the ocean is finally having its moment. And I hope it's more than just a moment. It's having its era. And I think that's because there's a really growing understanding of the importance of the ocean for planetary health, including its role in addressing climate change, and a huge and growing reliance on the ocean for livelihoods and food security. So we, as the Australian government, cannot be involved in everything. We've got limited human and financial resources, so we really need to prioritise. And our sort of organising principle is, we need to engage to protect the health and resilience of our ocean. So that means key is engaging with our regional neighbours, as I said before, including sustainable ocean management of exclusive economic zones, but also the high seas. As Belinda said, there is no line on the globe really when you look at this in reality. And so one of our top priorities is BB&J. And I think maybe I can talk about it a little bit later if you'd like me to.
Thank you. Yes, we'll come back to BBNJ soon, or the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty. Belinda, I don't envy the task of getting across Australia and the complexity of our jurisdictions when it comes to ocean. As you said, we need to consider the states as well in this mix, as well as local communities, obviously, who are impacted. When you've travelled across Australia, has anything struck you in particular as really those common threads? Like, is there a confluence, or are different parts of our ocean estate, truly unique and therefore need sort of a carve out kind of consideration in a national plan? If you could speak to that, thanks.
Thanks, Jazz. Great question. I think there's a lot of similarity nationally in the key kind of themes that the plan identified. But the one probably that I would focus on is that people and the environment is sort of that enduring, complicated puzzle. And the piece underneath that helps that is collaboration, cooperation, and governance. So that's the piece that people kept coming back to time and time again, is how do we have those conversations? How do we hear each other? Because we're really good at hearing each other in our sectors. And sometimes we're good at that, hearing cross sectors in certain opportunities, but not all. And so that's certainly something we heard nationally time and time again, was just the piece that what can the plan do to help this organising framework actually help that conversation nationally.
Fantastic, thank you. And did you mentioned, Belinda, that you have, is it a task force or a committee of 24 different parts of government? Can you give us an example of, I mean, you don't just get together and, read each other's papers and say, oh, that's fantastic, I agree. Is there an example where, you took on some feedback and something significant shifted from another department or part of government? Just that idea of that cross-portfolio nature of ocean, I think is on everyone's minds. Is there an example that you can give to us of that?
Yeah, thanks. Look, I probably pointed two pieces, to be honest, and these are not the only ones by any means, because across 24 different just Australian government agencies and departments, let alone state and territory in jurisdictions, but probably national security. So the way in which we think about and talk about our ocean and the role it plays in our national security is not a natural area for the Environment Department and the work that I'd done previously. So this is an area that really our defence and others were able to contribute and actually sort of really help shape the part of the plan that talks about our international and relations and our borders and the role it plays. I think too, I'd probably just highlight the ocean food. So is another piece of an area that's, that's not as foreign, I suppose, from the environment portfolio's perspective to be thinking about ocean food. However, it's about understanding where is it heading, what do you want to do, and thinking about that blue sky. And so through that Australian Government Advisory Group forum of 24 different agencies, not only did you have like Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, but also AFMA and a number of other agencies that were able to contribute what they're seeing or hearing that we need to be thinking about for 10 years' time. So I think that's probably a piece that I'd highlight too.
Nice, thank you. I'll stick with you, Belinda. We've just got a question in here that's of relevance. Noting the Sustainable Ocean Plan is designed to be communicating information at a higher level, what mechanisms will the government use to ensure its priorities are being tackled by relevant stakeholders?
Nice. So I think I'd like to probably go to, we definitely heard through the public consultation that it's great to have a plan, but you've got to actually implement the plan to make the difference, and couldn't agree more. I really want to see a plan that makes this change, that makes the difference that we need, and in order to do that we need an implementation work program that identifies who, what, why, how, etc. So that's a really key piece of making sure that who needs to take that action, because not all actions are going to be necessarily relevant or needed immediately by all jurisdictions or all ocean users. So who needs to take that action, by when, and who else needs to be involved in that as well? So how can we collaborate about it?
Excellent. That's great. That covers off on another question that we've got about around an accompanying implementation plan. So, so that's terrific. Russell, you, I'm going to bring you in here. You sit on the panel with the other Sherpas. So while the members are sitting heads of state, it is the Sherpas who actually get to see the action happening on the panel. Can you give us some examples, perhaps, from other nations and how they're tackling the development of a sustainable ocean plan? Are we, are we lagging? Are we in front? Are people on their 58th version of it? And what do you think are Australia's natural advantages and disadvantages? Thank you.
Okay. All clear with sound? Okay. Look, thanks for inviting me and acknowledging the speakers before me. We've had a really good overview there. It's great to hear what's happening from Belinda and Susie. Look, the real message about the ocean plan concept is every country, and Susie said this, according to the national circumstance. So as of August, 9 of the Ocean Panel members have implemented or are updating their sustainable ocean plans. 4 are in the final development stages of implementing, and that would include Australia. Some of them have only been on the panel a short while. But the key success factors that I'm seeing amongst those that are strongly pulling ahead of the pack, very strong coordination between government ministries for coherent policy, access to high quality data, especially spatial and time series, and access to funding. And we heard a bit about that from ASFI today as well. This is highly variable across the panel. And there is some big moves for the Ocean Conference next year to really ramp up the available funding for sustainable ocean plans. And in fact, the conference has borrowed the panel's reference to 100% sustainable ocean, 100% management of through a sustainable ocean plan. So the goal for next year, 100% alliance, all 150 coastal states managing 100% jurisdiction through their sustainable ocean plans. And Australia is playing some key roles in the planning for that conference that Susie mentioned. So I'll just pick one example of a country that's really come out of the blocks, and it's the co-chair country, Palau. They co-chair the panel with Norway. Alana Seed, their ambassador last week at the COP28, was defining their SOP as a master plan for the ocean. But they've got active spatial planning for fibre optic cables, offshore wind, fisheries management and protected areas. They're initiating new partnerships now on restoration science and mangrove carbon budgets. They're working with scientists from Japan on OTEC, offshore thermal energy conversion. So they're very active in the knowledge part and managing their own quite large Western Pacific domain. I will say that based also in Palau is Dr. Philemon Manoni. He's the Pacific Ocean Commissioner. His vision for the 22 countries in the Pacific is they will scale up sustainable ocean planning and have a regional plan for the Pacific. So that's coming along with, Alana also mentioned the Blue Prosperity Initiative, now at 240 million and growing to help them implement that. So look, there's plenty of others I could give, but there is a good summary of what everyone's doing. We've been very active across a whole range of areas in partnerships on plastic and ghost gear and blue carbon partnership. If I had to say, you mentioned the advantages and disadvantages. How are we tracking? We've got relatively very healthy ocean and considerable resources to manage it for sustainability. We also have very strong, for our country's size, so ocean science skills and information systems. And we've also been very active, I would say, punching above our weight in the international forums, the High Seas Treaty. Susie mentioned the Plastics Treaty. We're playing strong roles in there to support those. And we work very hard to be good neighbours. This is one of our advantages with our partners in the Pacific Island nations, the ASEAN region, Indian Ocean Rim. And Australia is known for valuing a stable, prosperous region sustained through a rules-based order, not only our EEZ, the exclusive economic zone, but across our regions. That's the pathway to a stable, peaceful ocean. So disadvantages that Australia has, as we'd all pick something, but I would say parts of our sustainable ocean economy right now are missing. We're highly dependent on trade through maritime transport, and hats off to Maritime Industry Australia for pointing to that. We've got a gap in equity for First Nations, and that's been highlighted. It's a classic opportunity, though, for us to embrace that culture and support our First Nations communities. And by the way, we still import more seafood than we consume from here in Australia, than we produce. So there's a few areas there where this plan that Belinda's outlined, Susie's outlined, we've got plenty of opportunities too. Thanks. Back to you.
Thanks, Russell. A fabulous rundown there, and I love that idea of the master plan. I'm going to tie to a question that we've got in the chat to just coming back, Susie, on the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty. We held an event earlier in the year, one of our Ocean Knowledge Series events regarding the treaty, also known as the BB&J Agreement. So I'd be interested in getting an update on how that's progressing, but also wishing to tie that in, if you could speak to a question here around your reference to intersectionality being highlighted as critical to success. So I'm looking for, maybe it's something that maybe both Belinda and Susie can come to. BB&J, High Seas Biodiversity Treaty, does reference around having an element of fairness and equity to accessing the ocean's resources. And I guess, Belinda, it'd be interesting to hear, just picking up as well on what Russell just had to say, how the Sustainable Ocean Plan can foster collaboration so that we can address compounding vulnerabilities faced by maybe marginalised communities. So it's a bit of for both of you, but maybe first to BB&J with you, Susie, and then over to Belinda. Thanks.
Thanks, Jazz. And look, I'll talk about BB&J, but I reckon Russell's the best person to speak to about the intersectionality in the context of the Ocean Panel. If you're okay with that, Russell, you see so much of it in your role. But BB&J, we are making good progress towards ratification. So the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties considered the treaty a few months ago and recommended that Australia ratify. So we're making good progress and we're on the pathway. I can't give you an indication of when we're going to ratify, but we're certainly aiming for the UN Ocean Conference in June next year. But we have a federal election before then, so we'll see how we go. I talked about the 3 stages of the panel before. I sort of see 3 lines of effort on BB&J. So the first one is the ratification piece. The second bit is preparing for the first conference of the parties. So once the 60 countries ratify, then the treaty will come into force a certain period of time after that. So probably sometime in 2026 at the earliest. And Australia is co-chairing the preparatory commission with Belize, which will prepare for that first conference of the parties. So that's the second line of effort on BB&J. And the third line of effort is thinking ahead to implementation. DFAT provided $3 million to the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner that Russell mentioned before, just to support Pacific nations to sign and ratify the treaty. Minister Plibersek at the Global Edge Depositors Summit announced $100,000 towards a research symposium to investigate the prospects of the Lord Howe Rise and South Tasman Sea as a potential high seas MPA to bring forward to one of the first conference of the parties. We've been working with CSIRO to do some, early scientific thinking to support establishment of high seas MPAs in the Indian Ocean region. We've been engaging in Southeast Asia to help build awareness of the treaty and engaging very heavily in the Pacific as well. So it is a really big priority for us. Yeah, and we're on the pathway.
Thanks, Susie. That's great. I'm conscious of time, so we will come back. Sorry, Susie, if I can get you to mute. We'll come back with responses to those questions with our panelists after the session. I do have one final question, if I could get 30 seconds from each of you. If you had to select a group of people to talk to who were really critical to getting the future right, who would they be and why? I'm going to go straight back to you, Susie.
Thanks, Jazz. I think everyone needs to be involved because we all have a stake in the ocean. We rely on it for our survival. But if I had to pick one, I would say the finance sector. I mean, we know what we need to do to transition to a sustainable ocean economy. We need the finance to help us get there.
Excellent. A call out to anyone in the finance sector. Russell.
Right. I would want to speak to young people across cultures and locations, especially those who are becoming aware of life beyond the family. They're growing up, but they're young. The issue of literacy begins the earliest stage and is lifelong. Adopting the habit of curiosity and learning is key to literacy. Some cultures have it built in. Thank you, First Peoples of Australia. And they keep those stories alive and educate young people through their songs and knowledge across generations. If you ask me, who would you want to listen to? Anyone whose voice is currently low or silent. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Belinda, over to you.
I am greedy. I just want them all. And I'm not going to play by the rules and say one, because I don't think we can make the sort of impactful change we need with sort of one voice, but there are definitely equity issues that we need to consider. I think that one piece I'd say is that it's about how, and that willingness we've heard from around the country to come to the table and find the path and find the forum to hear each other and keep up that willingness. I think that makes a massive difference.
Fantastic. Amazing. Thank you all. And you heard it here first. Belinda Jago is quite greedy when it comes to stakeholders. I love that. If you're on the chat, please do take note of looking at these two documents, progress report and, of course, the draft plan. Finally, we just want to turn your attention, of course, to the United Nations Ocean Conference in Nice in France. Ocean Decade Australia will be there. We're very excited about getting along, and we are asking people to let us know if they're intending to join the conference, which will be in June next year. We will be hosting an Australia Pacific reception, and it is a really great way for people to get to see each other pre, post and during the conference as well. We also want to let you save the date for late August for our next Ocean Business Leaders Summit, which will be held in Cairns in far north Queensland, a beautiful part of the world and a great time to get there. So do put that in the diary as well. Finally, we just want to thank everyone for all the amazing work that people have done over 2024 with us. Thank you for inviting us to join your stages. Thank you for joining the platforms that we try to build at ODA. We wish you a really safe, peaceful and happy festive season. Thanks everyone for joining us today.